Sunday morning news, views, and interviews. Your host, Aaron Mayer. Again with us, the powerful engineer man on the boards, my brother Mike Ryan. He's killing it. He's crushing it. Again, we love this digital format. We've been around. The show has been 70 years old, and I've been around doing the show now, hosting it for 25 years. My brother Joe Condon has retired, and as I said, when he retired, so did the analog world. So I am now in the 21st century, and it's really important. I'm listing this out because one of the fellows who I've done several shows with, and I knew I would be getting back on. He said, "Aaron, you're pushing out great content, killer content, and this has got to be around nationwide. It's got to be around for YouTube. It's got to be around." So that brother's Tykee James, who's right now president of the board of directors for the DC Audubon Society. And it's kind of good because I'm not, paying it forward with the younger generation. I'm an old dog in the young dogs world. And brother Tykee, he's the one through our Green Leadership Trust and other entities try to push us OGs into the 21st century so that the content that we're dropping is there, it's relevant, and and it's, as I say, it's the internet, so it lives forever. So brother Tykee James, I want to thank you again, and thank you for being this morning. As I said, we got a lot to cover, brother. So again, welcome.
Thank you so much for that warm welcome. And, learning a lot goes both ways. You said it in a lot of ways. Yes, internet lives forever, but so does legacy. And I'm really proud that I can be part of this.
Well, it's one of those things that, when we founded Green Leadership Trust, it was about how do we transition the knowledge from us OGs to the next generation of environmental fighters and leaders, but also have an organization that shapes new leaders and prepares new leaders on how to be leaders on boards of directors, how to lead organizations, getting the technology on what's really behind grassroots organizing so one can be effective, helping communities be effective. And so I've always, as I say, enjoyed being an old field commander, but sometimes you got to go back to the equivalent of the environmental Pentagon, the EJ Pentagon, so that you can start to mentor and lead those next new generations of leaders. So brother, it's always good to be in your corner. Yes, you guys do make me blush when you get me out on the road and have me speaking. But it's always important to talk about the technology so that we can transfer our technology and knowledge of how to be successful environmental leaders and environmental fighters. Tykee, let's talk a little bit about Green Leadership Trust before we go into Audubon, because we wanted to lift that organization up, because there will be leaders from the Green Leadership Trust who represents environmental organizations in the environmental movement and diaspora nationwide in the U.S. and Canada. So in that hat, why don't you tell us a little bit about the Green Leadership Trust and what you and I share a part of, but also the mission and the work that we're trying to do. You're on the executive committee, so why don't you talk a little bit about the GLT?
Absolutely. I've been with GLT since about 2019, I believe. And in 2020, I was awarded Agent of Change, which was a tremendous honor to be seen by my peers as a change maker, a little bit of a catalyst, a good troublemaker. And I wear that
good trouble.
Yeah. Good trouble. Yeah. I wear that badge with honor every single day. The Green Leadership Trust, how I like to explain it to folks, the environmental movement is being resourced by these nonprofits. Right. They are not the environmental movement themselves.
Again, could you break that down? When we say environmental movement and these nonprofits, we're talking about national environmental organizations, national, statewide, and local environmental organizations. So, these are the vehicles by which people who are the movement engage in action, or through which people engage in action. So I want you to break that down.
And I really appreciate you saying that. It is the fact that, yes, these environmental nonprofits, these 501c3s based in the United States predominantly, being, as they are currently today, white-led and propped up by rich white folks and even created by rich white folks. That's why I say they are not the movement. They are a resource to the movement. And the Green Leadership Trust is a membership organization of board members. So folks who serve on the board of directors governing these nonprofits, being steward for these resources for the movement, and seeing that this is the first and only group of its kind, of Black and brown folks that serve on boards, sort of in these governance leadership positions, having influence over the way the environmental movement is resourced,
Okay.
is the 10-year synopsis or a 10-year summary. And I've only been able to be part of 2 of those 10 years. So it is definitely a lot more than what I could explain briefly there, but that's what I love
Exactly.
telling people about Green
Exactly.
Leadership Trust.
And one of the things that they did do is the Green 2.0. There's a study, there was an analysis on, again, this is, everybody knows about the action that activists engage in since Earth Day. The movement has always been the people. And they go to foundations, and foundations give money. They go to individuals, they give money. In fact, many foundations give money and individuals to tax deductible. That's why these organizations are tax exempt. So they get tax deductions to finance issues that that they love and are passionate about. So if it's protecting the birds or looking at activities, because last week we had Brother Lee Foster, African American, one of the few Black falconers, certified Black falconers last week, and I got to connect you two, by the way, on News, Views, and Interviews. But the means by which they get resource are through these foundations and these individuals and organizations. And the payback to them for their benevolence is a tax deduction, but they finance what I call the action, which is really a key point. And Green Leadership Trust was part of a study and analysis of showing how inequity through investment is not basically being spread in a diversified way. Organizations that themselves that are getting the bulk of the funding, don't have diverse boards and don't have diverse staff, and yet they want to step into frontline Indigenous, Black, Hispanic, and Asian communities, and as they say, and fight, or speak for those who are actually on the front line in the revolution. So the purpose, I think, in GLT is trying to say, let's have a conversation about that. And you guys began with a few boards, because not every board was integrated, but you decided that, we need to get a organization of leaders from the leaders of these boards to help have a conversation about these inequities. And can we reconfigure or reboot the system to be a way that it's equitable and inclusive. And because diversity is a dependent variable, but that means that if equity and inclusion as the independent barriers taken care of, the outcome would be diversity. So
Absolutely.
in fighting along those things, you start to create a mechanism by which action now and resources can truly be targeted to frontline communities. So do I got that summary kind of right with the Green 2.0 and the report that y'all did?
Well, Green 2.0 is actually a different organization that provides exactly what you said, that study, that understanding, that definition, that line around this is what the problem is. And we can see now for the first time how progress is being made, to some extent, how it's being measured. And there's a lot that we learned from Green 2.0. But Green Leadership Trust is the membership organization. Green 2.0 is, I think of them as like the data-based folks that share a similar first word for a name for a group, which is not too bad of a name, right?
But y'all work hand in hand, though. They're not
absolutely,
like on different sides of the planet.
We work hand in hand. We go to the same networking events. There's folks from the Green 2.0 board that are members of GLT, and we're big fans of each other's work. So it's really great that we are existing in the space and in support of one another. And I'm in a position where I get to learn a lot from everybody.
And that's the thing, right? A healthy organization, like I said, I went to the national board of the Sierra Club, and we'll talk a little bit about that in the second half. But the point being is that once one gets through the door, how does one bring other people through the door? But more importantly, younger activists who have a lot of fire and train them, because again, when I started out, I was your age, right? I was in my 30s, right? I was a young father, 32, with 3 kids, all of which were being poisoned by an incinerator, solid waste incinerator. And I'm now over 60 years old in the game, and it's still not showing me any love. In the words of Rodney Dangerfield, I'm still not getting no respect. But knowing that I still also, I don't want to be a legend in my mind. I don't want to be a legend in anybody's mind, but I must train that next generation of brothers and sisters. And so that's why I think that where we have evolved to right now with these organizations and with the movement, people like yourself, are stood up now, not having to go through the trials that we have, but now taking this technology to the next level.
Absolutely. And I mean, part of what the benefit of having a membership group of different folks who have, to the extent, the same experience in saying you've served on a board, but so many different experiences from so many different organizations, we can be, and we are putting our minds together to be the most innovative, leading, good governance organization that will benefit the environmental movement, the economic justice movement, the social justice movement for years to come. Because we realize these resources and the way that the nonprofits, especially the legacy organizations, to bring that word back, legacy organizations.
Well, I'm gonna finish that thought, but I want to get the glt.org up on the thing because we got about 20 seconds, but then we're going to dip. So we get glt.org, so folks who are listening can go to the website and check out, this what I call superstructure organization. While, as they say, we carry this conversation. Well, look, TikTok, look, it's already here. Let's get this commercial in, and we'll be right back. Sunday morning news, views, and interviews. Your host, Aaron Mayer, our guest, Tykee James, again, the board president of the Washington, D.C. Audubon Society. I probably made you president. You're probably head cook, bottle washer, and all the above, but also a member of a number of boards and leaders in a number of environmental organizations within the national and international environmental justice movement. And what's really important, as they say, when we talk about what's happening in the movement and how the movement is advancing, part of the reciprocal is that brothers like Tykee has pushed old dogs like me to do shows like this so that we break down and transfer this knowledge and create a platform and format. And I rely upon them, Mike Ryan, who's our engineer here, to capture this knowledge and disseminate this content. Because again, it's not about us. It's all about you, the community, the listeners, those of you who tune in faithfully every Sunday morning, who rely upon the information that this channel drops down. So that at the end of the day, this knowledge will save your life. This knowledge will impact your community. This knowledge will make you stronger, better, and hopefully an engaged citizen. And that's what we really care about. And again, Brother Tykee James, again, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule this morning, let's talk about and the work that they've been doing. And this is training the leadership of the leadership to be more effective, organized with the national environmental movement. And every single board, every single major environmental organization, directors are represented in this body. And so we got Environmental Defense Fund, the League of Conservation Voters, Sierra Club, Audubon Society, Defenders of the Earth, the Indigenous Environmental Action Network, let's say Green Latinos. I'm going to be missing a few, but but my point is, we have folks who come from as I say, retired U.S. Forest Service, Department of Interior. So I mean, there's a whole cadre of individuals who are part of this organization, and now in the work of your partner or sister organization, Green 2.0, taking the active data intelligence on not-for-profits and how they invest in the environmental space to make sure equity and inclusion are in the performance criteria of mainstream environmental organizations, which then drives the diversity of those organizations and their outreach. So this is important because nobody is publicizing. I mean, within the Beltway in Washington, D.C., New York City, California, within the big states, we all know each other. But what's great about this show and this platform is this is now putting it out there, for the listeners and the content for folks to know that this organization exists and it's kicking butt. It's really the force. These are the people we want to know when we talk about the Inflation Reduction Act and the new phase of the environmental leadership within the Biden administration. This organization and leaders from this organization are the frontline people talking to the president, his executive branch agencies that are absolutely shaping the appointments, the appointees, but also the investments. You know, they're the ones who define the 30 by 30. They're the ones who actually start to put the meat on the bones programmatically when we act. And what does it mean for, and, you know, again, to talk about the success of Green 2.0, we've gone from just hoping and praying that there may be $100 million grant, you know, within a state, a federal or state agency. Now we're talking about billions with a B invested in the environmental justice and climate justice space. Take a victory lap, but in the framework of what does this mean, brother, and how the GLT and leaders like yourself have been shaping this conversation.
Well, you pointed out some really great achievements and really great metrics for success that the Biden administration has set up. Some of those came from campaign promises made, and now the administration has kept. One thing I would uplift is the Justice 40 initiative.
Okay.
The Justice 40 initiative is everything you said, and what I like about it in the inclusion of this. But I mean, it's the floor is pretty low, but this is the most ambitious vision for environmental justice of any White House. Justice 40 is to ensure 40% of the benefits of this environmental progress that we're trying to cook up in many ways with influence externally and then within the administration, making sure 40% of those benefits go where they haven't gone before, where they haven't equitably gone, making sure that we increase the access to the benefits of this progress and not have it be that, you know, as some folks have misunderstood the environmental movement being led by these big environmental organizations, like they do not define our victories, you know, because so much of our progress has not gone to the folks who need it most. So Justice 40 is in part that measure to bring out that at least 40% of those benefits going to communities that need it most. Low-income communities.
And here's what's important about that, because it's, you know, is that, you know, we are seeing the original people of color movement, really poor color, you know, poor whites, all the way poor blacks, everybody was the original EJ movement that got Bill Clinton to create the Environmental Justice Executive Order. They want to try to have an environmental justice law. We didn't make it cross the threshold. So this is actually making sure, because this Justice 40, the criteria is a combination of poverty, frontline communities, a whole host of indices. So even poor, very poor white communities, like up in the Adirondacks of the state of New York, all the way down to rural Appalachia, they're not excluded. Because a lot of people think, well, you're only giving money to black folks. That's just not true. Like civil rights are for all Americans. We're just putting a floor to make sure it reaches all Americans. So Justice 40 makes it sure that there's a floor for the poorest, the most environmentally impacted within America, you know, get access to those funds, and that is not flowing to the wealthy as it has traditionally done. It is recognizing that, you know, for better for worse, poor communities are not really organized. They're not well resourced, right? This is the technology coming from the EJ movement that says we got to find new modalities by which we're able to really make sure those who we really are, they're most impacted, frontline, get those dollars. And that goes from rural Maine all the way down to rural Southern California, and, you know, urban Maine all the way to urban, you know, Los Angeles. The point of the matter is that these frontline communities and those in that criteria, just about every state has a Justice 40 community or Justice 40 census tract in it. And these dollars, thanks to the EJ movement, looking out for everybody, and through GLT.org, you know, that we got, you know, these, you know, as they say, that investment, you know, piece laid out there. So GLT.org is the means by which we get that, you know, resource, but that network up there that, you know, that really pushes, you know, that advocacy.
And greenleadershiptrust.org will have information about upcoming events so that you can join and be part of this conversation. Perhaps, and let me not jump too ahead. Maybe you've been parts of these conversations. Now, this is your opportunity to be in collaboration with other folks that are trying to figure it out while they're on the other side of Appalachia, or whether they're in Portland, Maine or Portland, Oregon. It's about connecting that movement and seeing that the work, yes, may be local. The work and the meaning of the work may be really impressionable local, but it is connected nationally, hell, internationally. And that's something to be proud of. So there's some upcoming events you can check out on greenleadershiptrust.org. And that's also where you can find where to be a member. If you're a board member, or if you're interested in being a board member, that's the place to go. That's what I tell everybody to do. And I serve on a couple boards. So take it from me. It is fun.
What about it, though, again, when people talk about the advocacy that people of color are lifting up in all colors, and the advocacy results in federal benefits to all Americans. And that's the thing that I like is powerful about this. There's just what I call a level of sensitivity that's often not there when it's run through what I call the politics as usual. And as you know, where we are, we're in a dark place right now in this country with regards to hate. And we just got to break, that cycle, my brother. We got about 10 seconds. Your closing thoughts on this segment of our show.
I think it's so powerful for folks to come together and leverage their power to change these big policy points, because it's not going to be one campaign. It's going to be the collaboration of campaigns.
I appreciate you. Listen, this will wrap up the radio part of our interview. And I want you folks and our listeners to catch the entire interview on YouTube. Just search for News, Views, and Interviews, and you will find it when you get the second half of Brother Tykee and the movement, as they say, in the revolution that is currently moving in your interest, the people's interest, the American interest. Thank you. News, Views, and Interviews. Brother Tykee James, we're going to go over to the Grand Dam of Rotterdam for a wonderful cup of coffee. My brother, thank you. News, Views, and Interviews. Your host, Aaron Mayer. This is the extended session, and this is that YouTube version. But if you hear it during the morning version, you know that I'm probably out sick. But anyway, folks and listeners, again, you heard Brother Tykee James of the Green Leadership Trust.org, but who's also a member of the DC Audubon Society. He's the president, and leader of that body. And that's where I really know Tykee James from, because, again, the environmental movement is not just from those who dealt in toxic like myself in environmental injustice. There's also the enjoyment of nature and the enjoyment of the outside. And one of my things through the Forever Adirondacks campaign and my Adirondacks work is the enjoyment of wilderness. And as Brother Tykee knows, I'm one of the handful of African-American wilderness experts in the Northeast. I happen to be blessed to be in the nation's largest wilderness park, the Adirondacks, which is the lower 48. You have to go to Alaska to deal with anything larger. And one thing that Brother Tykee and I have in common is rewilding and the natural world. And Brother Tykee is from the bird side. So, brother, why don't you tell us a little bit about the Audubon Society and the DC Audubon and how the Audubon is structured?
Right, absolutely. So the National Audubon Society was founded about 120 years ago from a group of mostly women, upper middle class, that were showing concern of the amount of bird feathers that were part of fashion. And that started bird conservation.
Wait a minute. Stop. Hold the present. I did not know that. I thought like John Muir, because they always talk about the organization formed by the white male. So this was formed in response to, because I remember all from the late 19th century onward, it was always the plume. In fact, you talk about military dress. Everybody had plumes of feathers. Peacockery was a symbol of Victorian leadership. But who would have thought that then they cared about the impact of plumes and plumage on that's wild, man.
Yeah, so it is, and it is the truth. It was about 50 years or so after the death of John James Audubon, the enslaver, the perpetuator of genocide, the xenophobe, the plagiarizer, the artist, the bird lover among us. He was dead, but he had this legacy of art, and as a group of women who knew who had quite the wits.
Legacy of art of lithographs that he prints of his around. He was a really decide the evil side, he was a very prolific artist, but really impressive art around birds. Which, by the way, if you go to Union College in New York, they have a massive Audubon collection over at Union
Yeah.
College in Schenectady, New York. Continue, my brother.
Or if you go to Hamilton, which is a restaurant bar in DC, I think it's off of 14th and G Street Northwest, a bunch of Audubon paintings in there. You like, if you've done enough into the conservation art world, you've probably run into a painting of his. Which isn't, that's not taking it away. I'm just adding all of the things together.
No, it's important.
Yeah, so he was dead for about 50 years when they founded the Audubon Society. Now, extra little layer of the onion here. They created this Audubon Society that would later become the National Audubon Society. But there were other chapters of Audubon societies that existed prior to the formation of these women and their initial issue about bird feathers.
Now, where was it founded at? What was it? New York, Washington, California?
I believe it was New York, because the Massachusetts chapter is older than the National Audubon Society. I mean, the Mass Audubon, that organization is older than National. So I believe it started in New York for National, and then has grown into this multi-million-dollar corporation that fools everyone into thinking it's a nonprofit.
Right. Well, that's another piece of intel, okay? Because it was these individuals, sort of like the Athenaeums, right? People don't realize before the modern library or the public library, all libraries were private. This was one of the places where wealth was concentrated, and they were called Athenaeums. And certain people of the wealthier class and caste had their memberships into these private libraries. Many of them still around. The Boston Athenaeum, which I use, there's the Worcester Athenaeum, there's New York City Athenaeum. These Athenaeums are still around. Some of the oldest collections in libraries and some of the rarest of rare books, because they date back to when states were settled and founded.
Yeah.
But
and not to derail from that point, but I wanted to add that there's probably not one of those in Philadelphia, because in Philadelphia, Benjamin Franklin was like, "Nah, we're gonna have a free library."
Exactly. But that's, realize the public libraries were oftentimes in reaction to those who felt that the elite libraries or privatized versions were exclusionary and not democratizing. So knowledge should be. Ben Franklin, that's one of the things I love about Ben Franklin. He democratized the movement. He was the scribe. He was the intellect. I always call Bob Bullitt the Ben Franklin of the environmental justice movement, because it's true. Bob Bullitt wrote the books. Bob Bullitt was out there, spreading the democracy, the intellectual documenting of the struggle. I mean, because as you know, there's the debate about the father, which the truth is that you have Ben Jervis and Charles Lee. The toxic waste and race study is what wrote and defined things, baby. But it's the onion, brother, right? And so
it's the onion. It's the onion. The more layers, the more you might find. But to summarize the Audubon story, so started with a group of white women that were like, this is an issue, that later turned into the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, the most bedrock form of protections for birds.
When did that happen? When did the Migratory Bird Treaty Act? When did that
happen? Man, you're gonna quiz me. I used to know this.
Oh, no,
it was
like
19.
You're dropping knowledge, bro. It's probably early 20th century, right? Early 20th century, right? That's how.
Early 20th century. I was about to Google it. Oh man, I used to know it on top of my head though. I did used to know it. But the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, that foundational law is the advocacy this organization built itself around. Now it's a over $100 million operating organization with now their first white woman CEO, their first woman CEO.
So founded
who
by
happens
women,
to be a white woman.
So listen, founded by women, and it's not really till almost 100 years later that it's now being led by a woman.
Exactly. That says a lot. That says a lot about the environmental movement. And whereas other organizations have had women leaders, Audubon has not until 2 years ago. So
well,
says a lot.
And a very, very important parallel, because the Sierra Club, people don't realize the U.S. Forest Service and National Park Service came as a result of John Muir, and again, an organization that he founded with, he wasn't the white supremacist, but Joe LeConte and the others that were faculty of Berkeley College in California were white supremacists. They were the eugenicists. It's kind of weird how these critical movements also have this weird overlap of white supremacy and eugenics and
Well, that's why I say these nonprofits are not the movement. That I say these nonprofits are meant to resource the movement because they have
okay,
gotten so far away from making meaningful changes in people's lives. I would never want them to be mistaken for the movement. They may
okay.
represent agents in the movement, players in the movement, resources for the movement, but they themselves are not the movement and they cannot define our progress. That
And
being
so,
said,
yeah,
mhm,
because the key point there is the brand. You know, something
yes.
began, and the legacy of the brand, you know, has carried forward. And I think the technology that you and young leaders are bringing to people's knowledge is that you need to know what's behind the brand. And so, not to take away from the work, but you should know your deep history of the brand, and you know, which is a critical part, in my opinion, of preservation, because you can't do the deep work without knowing the brand. Am I correct?
Yeah, you can't do the deep work if you don't know the deep truth at the end of the day.
There you
Like,
go.
I know the name is not the work, but if the name is a barrier to the work, then change the name. Like, it shouldn't be that hard to understand the justification behind it. And
Right.
I bring that up, kind of jumping the gun. I'm sure you wanted to ask
Well,
me about
we're
that.
gonna get we're gonna get into that in the next half, because I mean you teed that up perfectly, because that is the conversation of the second half. The controversy, you know, uh, uh, um, behind the name and the fight right now, because that's also happening within the Sierra Club. And so what am I looking at on time over there, Mike? So listen, we're gonna go for a break right now. We're gonna pick it up in a few seconds. Stay right there, brother. News, views, and interviews. Your host, Aaron Mayer, our host. Listen, man, this is what happens, man. It's
You
you
get
know,
so
don't
excited.
listen, brother. We're covering some deep stuff, brother, and we're doing some movement stuff. We're getting the history in. We're dropping that knowledge, but we're also dropping the conversation that everybody needs to have. The replacement of things that need to be changed, because there are a lot of people politically are arguing about, oh, well, you're canceling this, you're canceling that. No, listen, do not reduce the fact that we're seeking corrective action to past racist or bigoted legacies as canceling. You know what the deal is, and just blanketly thinking that people are canceling something. No, dig into knowledge. What the right wing tries to do is a Roger Ailes tactic of find somebody's positive and turn it into a negative. And
Mhm.
what we want to try to do is like say, listen, drop that. We're not losing the word woke. Woke is about being conscious. Okay, it's about being aware. And when you're aware of something, you're no longer asleep. So other people, their hatred thrives in the dream, what we call a nightmare. Okay, so they don't want people to analyze the nightmare state that they're living in. So they are arguing an anti-woke argument as if that's the negative. No, being conscious is never negative. Being
No.
awoke and being hip to something and knowing something. People, I can tell you right now, many of our listeners and people who will tune into this on the internet did not know that the Audubon Society began by women trying to protect species that some would become endangered, some would become extinct. But it was their action that did that. But here's the other deep part. An organization founded by women wasn't led by women until almost 100 years later, because of the
Mm.
deep institutional constructs of who should be in leadership, who should be in power. And that was not being analyzed. In other words, people were not woke. They were not conscious. They were not awake to the contradictions that are there. And we're now in a space in the 21st century where we're having these deep conversations about power, action, and race, and aligning them to values. So I'm a little bit of two minds, because, like I said, there's many people understand Audubon, they understand the brand, but I also think that people need to, like Aunt Jemima and Uncle Ben's, know that there's some history behind that image and that title that you should know. Now, granted, they took Uncle Ben off the box, they took Aunt Jemima off the box, but you do know that those products were anchored in imageries of slavery and subservience. And I'm glad we had that conversation. But I think also the deep knowledge, because as you know, people have been for over 100 years, and intergenerational wealth has been donated checks, to the Audubon. Some people met their
Yep.
spouses at Audubon
Yep.
outings, birding outings. So I can understand the politics, but then there are those who just get caught up in the ugly side, and being comfortable with the fact that, there was this ugly history. They don't want to acknowledge that. And I think therein is my support for a name change, is in the fact that people are resisting and don't acknowledge the ugly legacy and the good work. But I think also in people seeking to get, the change, that they also must lift up both as well. I mean, this is not at both sides, because I always believe, as a scholar, as an intellectual, even within the environmental movement, the knowledge is critical. And some things you must never want to forget, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so, I'm not saying, just like when we study the Civil War or World War II, the good guys and the bad guys, the master event. And I just think that, to that extent, all factors and facets need to be known. And so,
Yeah.
to me, I think that the conversation about the name is critical. But why don't we talk a little bit about that struggle? What was that? What's that been like from your point of view? I mean, I know National met. I mean, it sounds like, some of them are acting on what I call the National Republican conversation on replacement theory, versus having a deep conversation about owning Audubon, slaver, an unrepentant slaver, and
Mm-hmm.
murderer and participant in genocide, um, versus those who want to have a conversation about that history and whether or not they should. So why don't you tell us a little, break that whole conversation down for us?
So I'd like to start from, you know, I always find interest in trying to answer the question, how did we get here? And
Right.
if we try to answer that question about the Audubon name, I think it's very clear, or it's knowable, that the National Audubon Society in its archives of itself knew the history of John James Audubon. However, it was only a couple years ago, an essay written by J. Drew Lanham put a lot of light in the dark corner of how did we get here. And when we think about how did we get here with this name, to keep this name, we have to think too. The conversations that have happened recently about this name have come in part because National Audubon Society a year ago said it was going to undergo a decision-making process to decide whether or not to retain the name or change the name. And earlier last week, they decided to retain the name. And I
Now,
realized it's one
was that
thing.
was that was that inclusive? Was that decision a secret behind the smoky room, smoke doors, or was that a conversation that they engaged robustly within the chapters and the people throughout the movement?
The first thing you said. I don't think they are as creative to use smoke and mirrors. They can just not invite people. And
Okay.
no one was really invited. No one at all was invited to take part in. If you look at their public statement on their website about why they are retaining the name, they do not say anything along the lines of, we've heard from chapter leaders, we've heard from our members, we've heard from our employees. They don't say anything of the sort. So they tell you that they've made the decision. They don't really tell you what factors into it. You look into that statement a little more, you'll also find other contradictions. But one of the things I want to raise is the fact that it's one thing to inherit this name, to take this name on. This has been existing for over 120 years. I haven't been alive for 120 years. So we're inheriting the name. It's one thing to inherit it. Last week, they decided to enshrine that name, to endorse that name, to promote that name by retaining it. And I do think that is a short-sighted decision that will divide the Audubon network even further. The chapter leaders, including myself, have started to come together where we have decided independently of the national organization to change our names. Seattle, Portland, Madison, Chicago, and of course, DC. And just yesterday, New York City, one of the biggest chapters in the network, has decided to change their name as well. We are changing our name. We are keeping our mission because, again, we know the name is not the work. But if the name is a barrier to the work, well, then we're going to work on that. And
Right.
I think it should be an exciting time to rethink exactly how you want to represent yourself. When I introduce myself at a bird walk, my name's Tykee James, president of the DC Audubon Society. What people hear is DC blah, blah, blah society. I want a name that reflects our values and ambitions clearly, unambiguously. I don't want people to think that we're a highway in Germany. I don't want people to think that we're National Audubon. We're DC Audubon. I'm tired of
Right.
the confusion.
Right. No, I totally hear you, because a little bit of my own personal history I want to share is that my ancestors were enslaved people, and they were the 5-star staff of the Caesar's Head Resort, which was a wilderness entity that dealt with naturalists in the 1840s. And my ancestors were the people that would take naturalists out on the trails and identify species, and that people don't realize how the institution of slavery was part of that effort of, everything from flora and fauna and birds, and where to get the best view. That in the South, I don't know if Haygood in fact, Flip Haygood and I come from the same family, and we were all enslaved on the 12-mile plantation called Haygood's Mill.
Wow.
And the two ancestral names that came out of Haygood's Mill is Mackenzie and Haygood, and that's where Flip, and I. Now you talk about deep, man. Our ancestry goes right into this stuff, right at its core, man, and we were part of
Absolutely.
that. And I say that to say this, because one of the most revolutionary acts was an African American in Central Park trying to protect the wilderness was attacked because of his race, and trying to get people, a white woman, to respect the space and the birds, and take her dog. and she was attacked, and that actually increased Audubon membership. We got a minute, so I dropped that so that you can say your quick thoughts on that.
Well, again, deep truth is a recognition of the deep appreciation of the connectivity between today, yesterday, and tomorrow.
Well, brother, I again want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule. I know I'm going to be counting on you to spread the word to the various environmental leaders and activists to get on news, views, and interviews, so we can share this knowledge of our intimate circles, that what we do in the environmental movement, but now have that brief. Now we debrief one another, to brief our nation, to brief our audience. Again, thank you to the Grand Dam of Rotterdam. We're coming over for a wonderful cup of coffee. Brother Tykee James, here at News, Views, and Interviews. Peace.
Thank you so much, Aaron.